Hey everyone, today we're jumping right into the incredible story of an innovator who fundamentally changed global communication and user experience. And you know what the most astonishing part is? He wasn't some massive tech conglomerate or a seasoned engineer. He was a young teenager. In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how Louis Braille took a complex, deeply flawed system and engineered a breathtakingly elegant solution that is literally still used all over the world today.
But to really understand this innovation, we have to start with the inciting incident. How exactly did a 3-year-old playing in a leather shop accidentally revolutionize global communication? Well, the year was 1812 in Coufray, a small town just east of Paris. Young Louis was just playing in his father's harness-making shop. He picked up a stitching awl, pressed down hard, and the tool slipped, stabbing him directly in his eye. It's incredibly tragic, but a severe infection set in and actually spread to his healthy eye. By the time Louis was just 5 years old, he was completely, irreversibly blind.
Let's dive into Section 1, Into the Dark, the Early Years.
Now, what's truly remarkable here is how his family reacted. You've got to remember, in the early 19th century, there were practically zero resources or accommodations for the blind. But his parents made the very uncommon decision to raise him as normally as possible. His father actually hewed custom canes so Louis could navigate the village paths on his own. And thanks to an exceptionally bright and creative mind, Louis absolutely excelled in his local school. In fact, his brilliance was so apparent that at age 10, in 1819, he earned a scholarship to one of the first schools for blind children in the entire world, the Royal Institute for Blind Youth in Paris.
Which brings us to Section 2, the illusion of reading.
Arriving in Paris wasn't exactly the magical solution you might expect. When Louis got to the Royal Institute, he found a ramshackle, severely underfunded facility with a deeply flawed status quo. They offered the illusion of reading, but definitely not the reality of it. 3, that is how many books were in the school's entire library when it first opened. Even by the time Louis arrived, the availability of reading material was crushingly limited. And honestly, it all came down to the technology of the time.
At the time, students were taught using the Valentin-Hayoux system. Now, Hayoux was a well-meaning philanthropist who really wanted to help, but he wasn't blind himself. His system involved taking heavy paper and embossing it with the raised imprints of standard Latin letters. They did this using a super complex, wet paper pressing process against copper wire. As you can probably guess, these handcrafted books were massively heavy, super fragile, and incredibly expensive to produce.
But the fundamental flaw of the Hayoux system was that it was, essentially, talking to the fingers with the language of the eye. Hayoux designed a system that made sense to sighted people, not blind people. Tracing large, embossed Latin letters was painstakingly slow. And worse, because of that complex manufacturing process we just talked about, it was physically impossible for the children to write by themselves. They could consume a tiny amount of information, sure, but they couldn't create it.
That leads us to Section 3, the 6-dot revolution. Okay, so everything changes in 1821 when a man named Charles Barbier shares a tactile communication system with the school. Barbier had invented this 12-dot military code meant for night riding, basically raised dots in 2 columns that could be interpreted entirely by touch. Now, this was a massive leap forward, but it was still way too complex. Enter Louis Braille. He took Barbier's concept and absolutely obsessed over it. In 1824, he presented his own optimized revolutionary system to his peers. And get this, he was exactly 15 years old at the time.
This design evolution is an absolute masterclass in user experience. Let's walk through it. First, Louis started with Barbie's 12 dots. Next, he used a metal slate and stylus to create strict, uniform columns just to keep the lines perfectly straight. Step 3 is the real stroke of genius, though. He ruthlessly reduced the maximum number of dots from 12 down to 6. Why? Because a 6-dot cell fits perfectly under the pad of a single human finger. That meant a letter could be recognized in one touch without having to move the finger around at all. Finally, by his 1837 edition, he discarded any tactile dashes that were causing confusion. He had successfully engineered a hyper-efficient single-touch system.
When you put them side by side, the night and day contrast is staggering. The old Hayoux system was heavy, fragile, and impossible for students to write with. The new Braille system, it was compact, robust, and most importantly, using just that simple slate and stylus, it finally gave blind individuals the power to write completely independently. It wasn't just a clumsy adaptation of a visual alphabet anymore. It was a true tactile language, optimized specifically for the blind.
And Louis didn't stop at just letters either.
He was actually an accomplished cellist and organist who played for churches all over France, so he meticulously adapted his 6-dot code for musical notation, making it flexible enough for literally any instrument. In 1838, he published a mathematics guide. And then in 1839, he invented something called decapoint. This was a dot-punching system using a specialized grill that allowed the blind to faithfully reproduce standard Latin letters, meaning they could finally write directly to sighted people. He was systematically tearing down every single communication barrier he faced.
And that brings us to Section 4, the fight for acceptance.
Now, you would think the world would immediately celebrate this teenage genius, right? But history is rarely that simple. Despite the undeniable superiority of his system, Louis faced fierce institutional resistance. In 1840, the supportive principal of the school was forced out, and the ambitious new leader Pierre Armand Dufault actually banned the teaching of Braille at the institute. The establishment just preferred the old, visual ways, but the system was simply too good to suppress. The students essentially formed a secret rebellion, insisting on learning and using Braille's system in the shadows, until the school was finally forced to officially reintroduce it in 1844.
You see, for Louis, this wasn't just about reading. It was a profound mission for human equality. He captured it perfectly when he said, "Access to communication in the widest sense is access to knowledge. We do not need pity, we must be treated as equals." Tragically, Louis suffered from a persistent respiratory illness, which was long believed to be tuberculosis. He died in 1852, just 2 days after his 43rd birthday, never truly getting to see the massive global impact of his life's work.
Let's look at our final section, an enduring global legacy.
An idea this powerful simply couldn't be buried forever. Driven by the overwhelming insistence of the blind pupils themselves, the system began to break out of Paris and spread across the globe in this incredible delayed triumph. While Braille invented the course system in 1824, it wasn't officially adopted by the French Institute until 1854, 2 years after his death. It steadily gained international champions, finally being adopted by U.S. schools in 1916, and it actually took until 1932 for a universal Braille code for English to be formalized. So what started as a forbidden, secret code passed among teenagers literally became the absolute worldwide standard.
And, the true test of any great invention is its longevity. Nearly 2 centuries later, that original 6-dot foundation perfectly accommodates the digital age. Modern Braille seamlessly adapts to new technology. Today, we have refreshable Braille computer terminals, Robo-Braille email delivery services, and incredibly comprehensive systems like the Nemeth code for advanced mathematical and scientific notation. The underlying architecture of his code was so remarkably solid, it easily bridged the gap from 19th century paper to 21st century software.
The honors eventually bestowed upon him really reflect the magnitude of his contribution. On the centennial of his death, his remains were moved to the Panthéon in Paris, where he rests alongside France's greatest heroes. But, in a beautiful, highly poetic gesture, his hands, the very instruments that mapped out a completely new world for millions, were left reverently buried in his hometown of Coupvray. There's even an asteroid named after him now, and he sits firmly on Britannica's list of the 100 most influential inventors of all time.
Ultimately, Louis Braille proved that communication is the absolute foundation of equality. He saw a world completely built for the sighted, and instead of just accepting its limitations, he re-engineered it to empower himself and others. So I'll leave you with this thought as we wrap up this explainer. Looking at the technologies and systems we use right now, what barriers are we still leaving up today? And who are the innovators currently working in the dark, getting ready to tear them down?